All right, hello. Welcome to Euphoria Season 6, Episode 5. I was on the wrong tab, so we're going to pretend like I started that off really smoothly. Spotify, Apple Podcast, Soundcloud, and of course, all of you people on YouTube. Just mouse something secret to them that you can only see if you're in video land. Take that, audio-only listeners.
Yeah, everyone just has to listen to this spit.
This
just
sound
quietly.
of me. The bonus for you at home is you get ASMR if you're in audio land.
Someone has their headphones in and is like, this is making me wildly uncomfortable and I've discovered a new fetish.
Woo! Two ends of the spectrum there in one sentence. All right, well, today's guest is going to be LS, caster, analyst for the LCK broadcast, a man of many talents and a very busy work schedule. If you don't know him, you're going to get to know him over the course of this episode. But before we talk to him, it's important for us to recap the first half. We had a break week. We did all 9 games across 4 weeks, given the Super Week. We're going to do it again with a Super Week in Week 8. And just as a quick heads up for anyone who has missed the action so far and is just coming in, we ended the first half of the split with Mad Lions Rogue, tied for first, both at 7-2. G2 Esports Misfits tied at 3rd. Excel Esports and Fnatic tied at 5th. With
Are you
Origin
in the right?
SK.
No.
Yes.
Good, sir.
LEC 2020 summer standings. What are you looking at?
I'm looking at LEC 2020 summer season.
We've got
But we've only played 5 games.
We've only played 5 games.
And you said 9 games.
We've only played 5 games.
I'm very
We're
disoriented.
only played 5. Girl, the first half of the split is done. There's 18 games in this. All right, we're gonna forgive Frostgar and we're gonna move on. What did you screen clip the wrong thing? We got to get to the LS thing. We don't want to keep them waiting. So anyway, there's a big fat tie for 5th place. All you need to know is there's a lot of teams letting us down right now. Schalke finally found a win. Mad Lions and Rogue are on top. And for the G2 and Fnatic fans, it's uncertain what is happening next. So Frostgar, to recap this discussion, to bundle it up nicely, 5 games. My God.
I had to hit refresh. He was open. I was really disoriented.
That's the last time you were here with the laptop,
but
isn't it?
Oh yeah, but here's the thing. I'm used to the LPL. By this point, we'd played like 300 games. What do I know if it's only been 5 games or 9 games?
There you go. That's the fire. All right. So
I've had very little
I want to
sleep.
break it down now that you have the correct game score. Are we optimistic about these teams, pessimistic, or my favorite category, meh? I'm shrugging right now. If you can't see this,
Kind of which teams are we? Okay, let's talk about optimistic teams. I think it's super easy to be optimistic about Mad Lions, Rogue. I think fit in that bucket. I'm not actually really optimistic about many other teams. And I think Origin fans are like, but what about us?
they're on a 2 losing game streak. So
what about you? Yeah, I'm super optimistic about Mad Lions and Rogue. I think it's super cool to see teams that were kind of like right on the edge now find enough development, as well as the other teams sliding backwards. And that's like I know we've said this multiple times, but I don't really see it impacting on social media yet. Guys, the top 2 teams got worse. Fnatic and G2 are not playing as well as they normally do. They are not playing in peak form that we have seen from these rosters, from these teams. Mad Lions and Rogue are also playing better. That is what 2 things can happen at once. It's not just the other teams playing bad, and Mad Lions and Rogue stay the same. Mad Lions and Rogue did get better.
Which, to be fair, is really hyped domestically. Makes LEC that much more compelling to watch.
Internationally.
But internationally, very scary. Yes, because the ceiling is not going up. We've just got new teams that are hitting the same ceiling. No one has broken the ceiling yet. We are not transcendently going to smash every LPL team now because Mad Lions are the second coming of, well, I guess G2. We can hope, though. Maybe. Team, anyone else you're optimistic about? Or is it just those 2?
Optimistic. Can I find a spicy optimist right now? I think it's easy to be optimistic about teams like Excel, Vitality, and SK. I think if you're one of those fans, you're like, my team's doing okay. I think draft is really reliant because they're still not getting it all the way right, but you can see like week on week development. It feels good that you're no longer just at the bottom of the standings.
That's true.
I think optimistic also for Schalke fans, if we're talking about goalposts. Like, Schalke fans had nothing to be happy about. Gilius comes in on that Lee Sin. Boom. Optimism is there.
Boom. Taking down the Fnatic fans a notch. That's crazy. I still can't believe that happened. That's so wild.
I was watching that game, or rewatching that game this morning, and I was just like, you can see Fnatic in the setup about kind of what they want to do, but then like instantaneously Schalke just punch him in the face over and over. They found really good angles too, especially on mid lane. Some of those Lee Sin kicks on Syndra in mid lane into Galio were just like, I was like, Gilius, that's that good stuff.
That's beautiful.
Oh, so good.
God, Gilius, full Super Saiyan. He's back. He's ripped. He's here to make a difference for the Schalke lineup. Gets them their first win. So I think that's good because you're right that these are teams that had, let's say, disastrous previous splits. are just disappointing in the case of Excel, but pretty disastrous for SK and Vitality and Schalke as well after that horrible start, even if they did turn it around. Here's my big question. Fnatic and G2. Are we pessimistic? Are we meh? Where are you? Where are you? Like, do you believe in the project, or are you just like, this is just going to continue to be a mess? Because we can go the historic angle, and it's like, and this is very valid and it's very fair, and people can bring this up, and we bring this up because I think it's true. It's that in the end, they always get there.
I mean, people are tired of hearing that from us, and like, I don't know what to tell you. The thing is after also talking with LS, I feel even more emboldened to be like, maybe not so much Fnatic. I'll still give them the benefit of the doubt, but like G2 especially, that I will give them the benefit of the doubt, because there's a huge portion of the interview where we talk with LS where it's like, how do you fix this problem? What are you teaching to players? What type of discussions are you having? And I listen to a lot of team comms, and I listen to a lot of G2 and Fnatic comms, and they just talk about stuff that other teams do not talk about. And I'm not going to say that that's because other teams or players don't know that those things exist or whatever it is. But when we're talking about this idea of variance or win conditions or whatever, I have more faith that G2 and Fnatic will hit closer to that target. Obviously, they're not hitting it right now. Fnatic in particular, we also talk about that with LS. But I have more faith that they have the combined brain cells that they can do it. And I've seen them do it in the past. I hear them do it when I listen to them in their comms. And that's why I have that faith. I know Reddit's unhappy with me. They don't like hearing. They want me to tear down Fnatic. They want me to tell them that they're a bad team. Guess what? Your team's shit right now. They're not playing very well. They're not on the same page. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be shit forever. And that's what I have faith in. I feel that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and eventually Fnatic will get it together and get it in gear. Why? Because I think that they have the talent on that roster, not just in their hands, but also in their brains. And that's my motivational speech.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Use those big old brains, Fnatic. Put them all together, work together, and you can be the change you want to see in your own team.
They have absurdly talented players.
Yeah, there's 5 really good players. So who haven't we actually hit yet? We've got
Origin
and Misfits. Are you pessimistic on both Origin and Misfits? Because here's
I'm kind of meh.
I'm kind of meh too. I'm distinctly meh on. You sound like you're optimistic for Fnatic, though.
I mean, like, I'm also meh on Fnatic and all this. There are 0 fiddlesticks for me to care about what Fnatic are going to do, because I'll be like, I guess I'll see you guys in 5 weeks at playoffs and we'll decide from there. And again, the audience doesn't want to hear this. They want us to take our shots at Fnatic and G2, like, kick them when they're down, put the salt in the wind. I'm like, there's nothing in it for me. The dog's already dead. Like, I don't need to shoot it again.
Wow. Normally it's a horse, because it's an animal that I think people will care
I just
less
got the
about,
vision of like old Yeller.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Because that's what it is. Like, they're the old Yeller of Europe. Maybe Europeans don't understand that reference.
That's true. They're the old reliable team. They're always going to be here at the top. That's such a bad branding. That's the worst branding of all time. They're here. They're always there. Guys, they're always there. They're not the best right now, but they're around. Okay? Is that not enough for you? They're here. They look good. No, so Fnatic's an interesting case. Misfits and Origin, I'm decidedly meh on. I could say pessimism about Origin, but honestly, it's like.
But here's the thing about Origin: they were this close to beating Mad Lions. Yeah, like Kaiser had to make a crazy Alistar outplay, which was super cool to watch. I think we also did a mechanics episode on it. I don't know, shout out. And like, still, people. Even in conversations, people always forget to bring up Origin. I'm like, that feels bad. They were this close to taking down the number 1 team.
Yeah, and then they lost to Vitality, and they lost to Mad Lions in that horrible way. And like, God.
I think the Rogue beating was the one that really hurt. Like, Nukeduck had a bad game. That was a real rough time, and Larson was just styling on him.
Absolutely brutal. Yeah, I've loved every Larson game except for that Echo game versus G2. Like, everything else was, versus Mad Lions. Everything else was sick nasty. The man is playing out of his mind this season. Him and Humanoid both are looking so good, which is so nice to see, because it's rare that we see significant jumps in or changes in mid lane tier lists once players are established, I feel like. Because like when Jizuke came in, he was like top 3 till he left, pretty much, right? And he had some dripes in performance due to health issues, but he was there at the top. So up until there was an external problem, he was there. Perks, caps, boom, at the top. Nemesis got his place in the top. But now they're dropping down and we're seeing these other guys rise up, and I think that's cool.
I also think that the meta really shifted into a good, comfortable spot, especially for Larson. Maybe not so much in Humanoid, because I feel like he has now shown that he can play kind of both styles, if you will, of the mid lane champion pool. But like, we're in Azir territory, and Larson's a really good Azir player.
Azir's nuts.
You were talking about it. Give us your little spiel on Azir.
I think Azir's a really stupid champion.
So do I.
Yeah, so in League of Legends, more often than not, mages are gated by two things, which is, or every champion has levels, right? And then they have stats that they scale with. And levels are really important for every champion. Historically, why mid laners go mid is because as magic damage dealing champions, they do better with levels than AD carries do, right? That's more often than not why we've seen mages in the mid lane. Assassins obviously have their place there as well because they value levels very highly. So that's why that solo lane experience is valuable. On top of that, they need to roam more, et cetera, et cetera. But levels are very important. TLDR. Additionally, you have scaling. Now, what makes AD carries insane and why AD carries are considered like hyper scaling champions and why you look at AD carries is that they have triple scaling. They have attack speed, they have AD, and they have crit chance. That means there's three things that can buff their damage output or multiply their damage output, right? 3 multipliers. Most AP champions have 2. That's cooldown reduction, which allows them access to their skills more regularly, and that's AP, which increases the amount of damage that their skills do. Azir, unlike many of the champions, has freaking 3 because he also scales with attack speed and cooldown reduction because his abilities do a shit ton of damage. His soldiers do a shit ton of damage, which scales with attack speed, and obviously AP just makes everything do more damage. So, yeah, I think Azir is absolutely nuts. He's safe. He has his own peel and his own zone control. He's like, build your perfect hyper carry. That's what you're telling me. You've got a hyper carry who can roam effectively, who can push waves whenever he wants, can peel and escape for himself. Like, give Aphelios an Azir wall and just see what happens. See how absolutely ludicrous that champion is. I think Azir is super dumb. Anytime he's good, I think he's like pretty insane if he can actually get through lane comfortably.
I'll push back a little on you. I don't disagree. I think that Azir's utility is, and especially his laning power is what really just gets me about that champion. But obviously, like, there's not a ton of attack speed items that also give you AP. He happens to make use of the few that are available to you.
The one, yeah.
So while I don't disagree with the sentiment, it's not like he's pulling out the zeals to like get the modifier on.
Yeah, I mean, it's true.
It does hurt though that the cost efficiency of his backs, like how much power he can get out of really inexpensive backs versus other mages in the mid lane. Like Azir can take any back that he wants. He can come back when he's got like daggers now.
You're like, I have to get a lost chapter or I come back with a tome and a crystal. He's like, yeah, it's fine. That's the only time you get a cheap back. I'm cheap backs for literally ever. To buy one blasting one in my core build to finish Ludens.
Listen, he's the buy one, get one free of mid laners.
Yeah. All right. So we've got LS standing by, so we can hand that into that LS interview. Wait, you already revealed that we did the LS interview before.
Guess what? We're about to talk to LS.
We're about to talk to LS. Get ready. Production magic. Here we go. Let's talk to LS. All right. It's now my distinct pleasure to welcome LS to the show for what is going to be potentially a very convoluted but very enlightening discussion on picks and bans. I'm so ready for it. LS, how's it going? It's thank you so much for coming, man.
No, it's really good to do this. I'm excited to do like collab content between regions, so it's really fun.
This is a generous statement. Collab content between regions. Is that what you consider?
Wait.
Sorry, I was just like...
Wait, who are you firing shots at? Are you firing shots at us or are you firing... Who are you? That's
I'm firing shots at us. Like, we do collab content.
We do collab content, yeah. We're not... LS, you're hot right now. We're milking you for all you're worth, buddy. I think we're the ones making out like bandits in this transactional relationship here.
See, the trajectory of our guests, we're like, Mad Lions are on the uprise. Quick, get Mac in here.
People are flaming LS again. Get him on the show. We're talking about one person built a Morellonomicon for no reason. Bring LS on. The people need to know. The people need to hear the good word.
It's all about the Trinity Force versus Black Cleaver. I went into the math yesterday in that Reddit thread. I was like, Jesus, people have way too much time on their hands right now.
Yeah. Quarantine's an interesting time for internet arguments. I feel like the people are really empowered.
Drake goes, I'm not even joking. There was at least 3 spreadsheets in that single Reddit thread. I was like, what the?
Yeah, it was... And none of it was, it gets so weird. That thread just struck me by complete surprise, to be honest. I don't know how that came to be.
Dracos, really. I can see your confusion, so let me fill you in. I was combing through Reddit, because I knew that I was preparing for my LS episode, and I was like, well, I gotta find some spicy Reddit bullshit that I gotta bring up here. And I see this, it takes it out of context. The comment is like, Ellis always says that Trinity Force is much better than Black Cleaver on set, and this is why he's wrong, or something like that. And then they go in, and we start breaking, like, Cassidy got involved somehow. There was, like, I clicked on several different links.
That's so funny. Cassidy always finds a way to get involved in this conversation.
Someone's actually talking about, like, the movement speed. I'm like, this is really cool math, and I appreciate people who took their time out here, but, like, this is a very strange takedown thread. Went off in very different tangents, so that's what we're talking about.
Okay, well, that's exciting. The people of the internet sure are having a good time on this one. Look, my thing is like, if you've got a math major, you got to do something with your time, because clearly you're not finding employment, and apparently Reddit takedown threads are what it's all about, coming after LS with the hard math.
First it was Leandri Morello, and now it's this.
God bless.
So it's fine.
Okay, so I'll do the introduction, because some EU fans might not know who you are, because we have a different audience ratio, possibly. Although I think everyone who watches the show is probably like a hardcore League fan. Obviously, LS, you have your current LCK caster, current Twitch streamer. You have coaching experience.
Ruined Fnatic.
Ruined Fnatic.
Ooh, that's good. We'll talk about that too.
Damn, I forgot that on the resume. Current coach of Fnatic. No. And master player in Korea for multiple years, as well as former StarCraft professional experience in your background. Yes? Did I get everything?
I've hit GM.
Ooh, you hit GM.
Nice. Not POG. Yeah, POG.
Above,
That's right.
above and
yeah,
beyond.
For card games, some people might not know, I invented Handlock in Hearthstone. Which is if anyone plays Hearthstone, they'll know what that means. And I was one of the highest arena players for a couple months, and then in Magic the Gathering I qualified for a tour once, but I couldn't go because of my visa. So that kind of sucked. But I have a background in card games, yeah.
And
as well.
I was really excited to get you on the show. And Dracos was excited to get you on the show, because I really like this idea of talking about theory of how to maximize playing a game, and taking different theories across different games and then applying it to League of Legends, which I feel like encompasses the conversation that you started. And I talk about this sometimes on my own stream, that it feels like casting is kind of going through a phase where it's evolving, and people are starting to turn the page because our audience has picked up a certain standard of vocabulary. And a lot of that is being pushed, in my personal opinion, by a lot of the casting that's happening on the LCK, specifically with you. And I think that the LEC is following suit. And then I would say the LCS is kind of following behind that. But that's kind of where I wanted to start it there. If you can give a broad overview to our audience about, like, because I'm sure people see your name, but they might not actually watch your content. When you talk about the perfect draft or the perfect way to play League of Legends, what do you mean when you were defining perfect?
I don't mean perfect by an absolute perfect way to play, because obviously if I expected one of the terms that gets thrown around a lot unironically is that players aren't robots. And the reason that I say that it's weird when people say that is because they don't understand what I'm saying if they make that comment. When people say, like, players aren't robots, they're trying to state that whatever I'm saying is overtly complex, or it's really difficult, or it is too hard for them to do. But on the flip side, if it's ever been executed intentionally once or even multiple times by certain teams, clearly that's not the case. But also, if the aspect of it is that it's reducing variance, diminishing the amount of variables that you have to juggle, doing all these other things while still retaining an edge, that's ideal. But, like, you can't have perfection, right? Because players aren't scripters. You can't script in the game. You don't have robot-like mechanics. You can't, exactly smite 100% of the time, which I guess comes into mechanics, yada, yada, yada. I understand all of this. So when it comes to, like, drafting or playing, I view the game much like an RTS player would. And I think that this is where, like, a lot of the arguments and stuff with me in particular comes into play, where a lot of players view the game through the scope of individual lanes or individual champions, how they pertain to the game. Whereas an RTS player would look at it and be like, okay, what is in the best interest of the overall goal using these 5 pieces, and how do we make it the most advantageous with each decision? And obviously sometimes that's going to cause certain things to happen that maybe that player, that lane, or that champion might not like, but it's in the best interest of the greater good. And I think that it's always just about gravitating towards the lower variance, the higher insurance policies, the higher percentage edge. I'm not saying that you have to be 100 and 0, but if you could be 85% instead of 80%, you should want to do that and you should strive towards it.
Does that make you
That makes sense.
predisposition to a team like, I'm going to bring up the word that everyone hates, Origin?
Wow, that everyone hates. Strong.
I don't know how much, and also
Wait, why does everyone?
Frosk's projecting right now, but like Origin is the quintessential. I guess you would describe them as like the classic LCK style, the old school LCK style,
Well,
where it's like low variance,
Yeah.
high percentage plays, not a lot of not a lot of big risk taking, not a lot of picking champions that are, let's say, volatile.
And I also don't want to put you in a position where, because I don't know how much time you get to actually invest like studying LEC, because it's obviously, at least I find it's different, like watching a region versus studying a region. So if you don't feel comfortable, like I'm not trying to put you on the spot, it's like
We can find an equivalent example in the LCK. We don't want to just like be like, hey, Origin fans, you want some pitchforks and torches? Like, here they are. Go get LS.
takedown. I did the math
And
on
now
it.
tell us what you think about G2. Oh, that's great. Okay, those fans will flame you too. And Fnatic got them. All right. But yeah, but OG's a good example. Like, do you feel like that makes, I think to what Frosk is saying, do you feel like you appreciate teams more or value teams more that do kind of fit into that draft philosophy that you have?
I recognize it if teams do it or if they don't. I've been talking about this a lot in like a lot of the co-streams, because now I'm co-streaming LCS and LCK, and then I do the live viewing for LEC. And I've only missed 1 week, I think, in this whole split. So when teams do that kind of drafting, regardless of if they win or lose, I care about the practicality of the draft. I care about how likely is it, assuming even level of play at high level of play. So two very high level teams, if they're both even, what is more likely to occur, and can we reach that answer? And I think that a lot of people take things that I say as very, very black and white, when the reality is that when I make the comment, it's formed on the basis of a lot of gray, and it ends up coming out black and white in order to save time. And for people that care about the gray, we can talk about it, but it's often not worth talking about, because to talk about it in the first place requires an explanation of the foundation in the beginning. And that can be very, very long, and it makes things very convoluted, and it makes things very drawn out and very long. And I think that's where like a lot of the controversy and polarizing stuff around me comes in like the last couple of months about like draft and items and all this other stuff, is because I view LoL as like a giant chessboard, and that each situation, while it might be very similar, has its own unique answers, and it's about putting the formula into those situations and then asking how practical is it given the assumed level of play.
So
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So do you feel like
Okay.
So I'm always going to try to put this back into like EU terms for the EU audience. So if we have a team like Origin, which kind of more so fits into that low variance, high assured call, like we always talk about it in the general throwaway terms, like it's 100% call versus like a 50, like bullshit like that. But versus a team, sorry, Dracos, I know I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to get an angry email. But comparatively to a team like G2 or Fnatic, which play a much higher variance, it almost feels like they'll be willing to take more 50-50s. Do you think then it's just the skill discrepancy between the players of why these teams who sit on top for so long but don't necessarily conform to that theory that you feel is kind of the best theory to approach the game with, but find a lot of success? Because I also feel like that's where the audience always tries to like get you a moment type of moment. Like, Ella said this, but if you look at G2, they don't play like that and they always win. Is it just that the G2 players are outplaying their opponents? That skill discrepancy overcompensates the theory that maybe they ignore or listen to?
Yeah, I think that if we look at other esports and other games, you can see similar things like this, where better players can just use higher variant strategies, or much more like micro-intensive if we're talking about an RTS, and they can just overwhelm their opponent because they're much better mechanically. They're much better cohesively, and the team compositions won't come to fruition. So what I like to cite is Worlds or international events or finals. In which case, a lot of people, they'll talk about like LPL, aggressive style and stuff. Well, at MSC, a lot of people know that I do post-draft prediction and I do pre-draft when there's like an event. And my post-draft and pre-draft, even at MSC, was very different because I had LPL teams over LCK teams post-draft the majority of times. So a lot of people will reference like LPL just beating LCK recently, and it's like, well, actually, look at the drafts. Look at Worlds Finals, because FPX, I would say, relative to G2 in that finals, had more scaling, except for the final game. I think T1 versus G2, you look at the T1 games, and that was T1 getting very big advantages with very sinful champions and being unable to close, and G2's champions come online. I remember Dom1, I predicted them to lose to the wildcard team post-draft, which, I mean, I just being a contrarian or something, I don't know, which made me start doing the post-draft pick ban sheets that I did in Worlds and Spring for LCK and Worlds. But I think for G2 and Fnatic, circling it back, the thing that's so strange to me is, and I've had this discussion with many EU players over the last couple of months because I've done so much content on stream with various pros, and like conversations and whatnot. A lot of players in LoL only know LoL. They don't know other games. So if you were to go to an island and the island has never seen a plane, and then you ask them to envision a plane, they can't really think of it. Like maybe they can imagine it, but they can't know how it's like formed and what really operates and whatnot. It would be like something that is just unfathomable at a certain point in time. Like maybe you go back to 1950 and you talk about modern day cell phones. It would just probably be unfathomable for people of that era. I think that in StarCraft and Warcraft and Go and chess and Magic the Gathering and stuff, because I had this talk with PBDDR, the Magic World Champion, on stream, and I've had this talk with many Magic pros on stream that are... some of them are actually like reasonably high MMR in League of Legends, and they say like teams don't get what's going on in drafting because League of Legends information is face up. There's no conceal. There's nothing concealed like in a trading card game. And so when everything's face up, you know what options are possible and like what's coming, what variations are possible, and you know where they're trying to go with certain team comps, and you know items are coming in and all this other stuff. So when it comes to draft, if you're the better team, what you learn by playing tournaments long enough and having an extremely long career is that you want more and more to reduce variance because you want to confide in your own skill. You want to let your skill take over the game, not variance. So if you can add weights that allow you to simultaneously outscale your opponent and beat them in lane, why not do that? Why flip coins, or why allow your opponents more breathing room than they should otherwise have for simply no reason?
I just want to push in for a second here.
Sorry,
Alice.
that was
No. Just because I want to, and it will probably sound very obvious to you, but what I really want to do is kind of break down some of the language, because a lot of times we use different definitions for different words, and I just want to attach a word like variance specifically to League of Legends, because it sounds like you're talking a lot about win conditions would fit into this. So if you are a highly skilled team and you play long enough, you should know that a team or a champion's win condition is like this champion strong on one item or two items, and then this composition is strong at two items or around these types of fights.
Yes.
And the variance would then be if you are a professional player and you look at the enemy team's comp, you recognize where the win conditions for your individual matchup are, where the win conditions are for the 5v5, where the win conditions are for what dragon is coming up, or you know how things are changing. Then the variance would be, okay, I see that my win condition is coming up. I have built an item for the next fight that's going to happen at 10 minutes versus the item that, or the fight that's coming up in 10 minutes, and not building an item that isn't going to be available then, and flipping there, saying like taking a bad dragon fight, that would be variance to you because you are fighting outside of your win condition if your composition is weak there.
Well, in this case, are you referring mostly to like draft variance? Because I know that center champions are what you call them, but the champions who kind of need things to happen in a way for them specifically to be powerful, champions like Lee Sin or Elise.
I was going to say, are you talking about Olaf?
Olaf, champion who without a lead is essentially irrelevant, but champions who rely on getting an advantage that is not like a guaranteed advantage.
Yeah, so variance I think has two ways that you can use it. I think the way that Frosk is defining it is also a thing, where the analogy that I like to use, and feel free to say if it's not like viewer friendly, is that you put a person in a chair, and you put a person in a chair, and you basically play Russian roulette with them with a gun.
Okay.
And you tell them that
As opposed
there's
to
a door and it's open.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a door and it's open, and 70% I will fire the gun and it will misfire and you can walk out the door. And then you tell the person, wait 5 minutes and the percent goes up to 80. And then wait 5 more minutes and it goes up to 90. Obviously, in that scenario, they would wait. They would wait every day of the week if their life depends on it. But for some reason in League of Legends, teams will push a mid-tier 1 for 500 gold, 250 of which is dispersed amongst like 4 members, and they'll take a team fight when they're 2.5 minutes away, factoring in like assumed gold per minute, all their jungle camps are up, from like an item completion. That will create a more advantageous fight. That stuff's just mind-blowing to me. It just doesn't make any sense, because if it was real life, they would never do it. If you go into that VOD review spot and you ask them to justify their push, and then ask them to play devil's advocate from the opponent's side, they would conclude that this is the most favorable timing for the opponent and the least favorable for them. And so stuff like that is variance.
Something that I always
Does that make
really...
sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Something that I always really respected watching the LPL teams, because I always feel that casters are really trained by the regions that they specifically watch. I think I always quote the Gnar thing back in 2015, that the Eastern teams were really playing a lot of Gnar top, whereas the Western teams didn't really play Gnar. And so the casters came into that MSI and they're like, Gnar's a trash champion. And then the Eastern teams continued to like beat them down with Gnar. And the casters are like, oh shit, this is how this champion actually works. But for me, the LPL teams were always so, at least the top end LPL teams, were always so good at recognizing their item power spikes. And it, without fail, you could always, like, very quickly as a caster, you look at the scoreboard, you see an item coming, you're like, there's about to be a team fight because they've just completed that item. And if I know the LPL team, so like, I'm really powerful right now. And so people would be like, oh, the teams are just really aggressive. They just fight all the time. It's like, no.
Yes.
They don't fight without, some of them fight without purpose, but the top end teams of the LPL don't fight without purpose. They always fight on their item breakpoints. It's not a 50-50. They know that they're stronger than you because they have better battle stats. And that's all they do. That's like the secret to it. People are like, oh, they play aggressive. They attack you in the setup. It's like, you're overthinking it sometimes.
They got an item. It's shiny and they want to use it. You've gotten new clothes before. You put on a new outfit. You've wanted to show off. That's all LPL teams are doing. They're peacocking. They're just very good at it. So to me, it just sounds like a lot of the kind of philosophy that we're putting forward here is that there is just, or we're seeing a lot of failure, and it feels like a lot of failure to just recognize game state, draft state, win conditions. And that's where a lot of these issues stem from, right? So Proscrin, you're bringing up itemization. LS, you're talking about kind of in-game decision-making just generally around what objectives are important. The very apt and poignant Russian roulette album or reference, which feels admittedly a bit extreme, but does make sense to me.
But can you imagine if a team, like if a coach had a gun behind the players, it was just like, take that dragon fight right now. Dare you?
I
probably wouldn't do it. They'd be like, my composition doesn't come online for, another 1,200 gold. I should sit this one out. Instead, they're like, it's infernal though, coach.
Yeah, so why do you think
stuff like that happens all the time?
Why do you think it's so easy for us to sit here and call this out, but like so difficult for teams to make this happen?
I think it's a shot calling issue.
Shot calling? Is it like poor coaching? Is it like, and not to name, you don't have to throw anyone under the bus, right? But like, why is this continuing to happen? Because League of Legends has been around forever, and it's not like they're
my
new
theory
problems
first
here. Sure.
And Alice, let me know what you think. So I think is that I listen to a lot of team comms, and very few teams actually talk about these things or even reference what the enemy team wants to do. And to use LS's phrase, when information is all face up, like you see the other team's composition, you should know what those champions you should do. Everyone should understand what the build paths are going to be. So when the champions are going to be strong, like you theoretically know what everything's going to happen. But if you're not constantly reminding yourself about it, you just sometimes forget. The players just autopilot and they do stupid things. And then also League has kind of evolved into this autopilot mode, especially in solo queue, where it's like very formula based, where it's, okay, what's the next tower up? Take tower. And they don't think about, as in reference to what happened in, I think it was the KT game, where if you take that tower and then you have the wave frozen on the other side and then you can't do anything, and then you're suddenly in a situation where if that tower was still up, we would have more available gold closer to us because we'd be able to reach it. Like, this is what happens. It's just no one is actually talking about it. So you have to train them to talk about it.
Yes. And the KT game is so interesting because I remember having a conversation with a pro player, who I won't name, immediately after the game. And they stressed that it's obvious that, like, so the turret that they're trying to get is 500 gold, right? But in the same light, on the same spectrum, they will not freeze waves to deny gold and create a larger net difference in gold. But then also there was like a LeBlanc clone that they could have just killed, which is 25 gold. And they just let it walk away, right, for free. So it seems really small. It seems like a grain of sand, but it's not. Because there are players that are thirsty for every little edge. That like they want to get every little edge. But when it comes into 5 players, I think that like what Frosker and you're talking about with the listening to the team comms and very little people are talking about it and all these other things. Not only is it, in my experience from like listening in, talking to so many people, it's not just that they're not talking about it, it's that they're not aware, which is an even bigger problem. So I made a tweet after the KT series that when I'm watching teams, all that matters to me is the intent, because the intent tells you what they're actually practicing, not the end result. So when you're seeing, so this is where I hold a lot of problems with like DRX, for instance, because the intent in DRX is that they are just trying to brute force everything. And so there's very little cerebral new innovation and approach happening in all of DRX's games, which means that come Worlds or come international events or whatever, DRX is just DRX from the LCK. There's no special thing, but they're also just gliding. They're not really improving.
When they run into a team that can match them in their fights, then suddenly they'll be at
in power. Yes. So they're going to be in a really big problem. And the issue for coaching this is like, okay, well, any challenger player can be brought into the coaching staff room, see a poorly done team fight, and point it out. Like that's anyone can do that. Most people could probably predict the exact points games went wrong if like they're moderately good at League of Legends, or they do a moderate amount of like analysis or observation, etc. The problem therein lies that a lot of people only observe, they don't analyze. They don't look at the foundation that's leading to the problem and then understand the makeup and then explain the makeup so that the players can understand how to reach that conclusion or how to avoid it. And I think that's the next step, and it's very, very, very hard. Because you have to be able to argue with like all 5 players.
Do you
like
think,
on whatever counterpoints they're going to give?
Then let's put it in like a theoretical space where you get a team.
Yeah.
If you were to try to solve this problem, are you then sitting down with like each player and being like, okay, the issue here is that you guys needed X amount of gold to get this item. Why didn't you just wait for it by doing X, Y, and Z versus running into fight? Because it's usually over a fight that people pick. Sometimes it can be, pushing waves back and forth or anything like that. Is it just going on like these small things where you're just taking each player and just constantly drilling into them? Like, would you start with items? Would you start with like how would you attack this problem if you were the coach of the team?
So that one's really interesting because items, it dawned on me recently that items and a lot of these thought processes, I feel like they should actually almost just have a class, if that makes sense. Because it just feels like even though some people get itemization right, I think they don't know why it's right. Like they're just sort of like copying, but it happens to be right. And I think that causes problems when new items come out or different build variations, or new champions come out and like you're trying to figure out how to itemize them. But about approaching this, if like you're coaching the players, you have to play devil's advocate. You have to make them justify their decision, and then ideally you make them justify it for the opponents. And somewhere in between lies the truth, unless they're being very disingenuous. And if you guys can't agree, then you try to simulate it. And I think that the best instances where you can recreate this, and it's where I'm the biggest fan of, is laning phase. Because everything that happens in laning phase can be extracted and applied to other aspects of the game. Like the entire game can actually be condensed into laning. And then bits and pieces of it are pulled out, and extrapolated and applied to other aspects of the game. And it's the same thought process.
Well, and I like that too, because I think that that's like the one thing that I feel like I can rely on pro players for without a doubt, right? Is I trust that every high elo pro player that's like got a brain that has made their way into LEC can tell me when they're stronger than their specific matchup. Can they tell me the comp? Like, I don't know, maybe not. It depends. Like a guy like Whippo obviously thinks a lot about the game from talking to him. And there's a lot of players who just kind of play the game more or so. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Obviously not great, but just how a lot of people are. So I like that you're starting there like kind of foundationally, because players for me more often than not play on feel. You talk about item spikes. They don't know that their Luden's Echo gives them enough damage to one shot that guy. They know it because of the math. They know it because they've played Syndra 150 times. And when that guy was level 7, they've one shot and they've just been in that situation. It's like it's not deliberate learning, it's unconscious learning, right? Which I think is
that's really good.
It's cool, but it's also it's not ideal, because now you're not really controlling the outcomes. You are learning, and solo queue isn't always the best information and the best sample size, because you're like, oh wow, I one shot Lee Sin like every time in this scenario. This is so easy. But then it's like, okay, yeah, but that Lee Sin was building full AD in your freaking solo queue game, and this guy's smart enough to buy a GA, so you don't actually one shot him anymore.
In terms of oh no, sorry. I was just going to kind of move us along into, in terms of, if a European viewer is watching LEC and they want to understand, who won or lost a draft, or what a good draft looks like, or what like an excellent draft is, like what would you say are kind of like the takeaway bullet points? Like what are things that you're looking for? I've heard you use, the magic color scheme. I've heard you use different like analogies, but is there like you must have a tank, you must have a X number of DPS, you want to have this type of damage portfolio? Like what are the bullet points that you would go down?
So I think for team comps, it gets really weird. So first, the thing that you do is you view all the matchups in isolation. And then you apply how practical is it that these matchups play out this way, assuming these level of players, because sometimes that lets you go against the draft. If you have, like, I'm going to use an LCK example. If you have Nuguri versus Cuve, a matchup being disadvantageous, Nuguri still probably will win. Or something like that.
You can tell his disdain by how he says the names. You can always tell when a caster's upset when they're just like, yeah, it's Alfari versus Fen. Who do you think's gonna win?
This isn't a winning matchup. It's just a better player. This is bad information. Don't do this.
Yeah. So I think it starts there, and then you have to ask yourselves, well, what do these item breakpoints even mean? Because one of the conversations I had on Twitter recently was obviously about Trinity Force Black Cleaver. And I think it goes back to what Dracos was just talking about like players don't realize why they're building the items, because often the argument I hear is that you can get it sooner, you can buy it sooner, and then now you have to justify buying it sooner. But is your champion that gets that Black Cleaver aligned with the mid laner who is on Sheen Phage Dagger and waiting for his Trinity Force because he doesn't want to fight yet? Which means that you can't fight yet because he doesn't want to fight yet. Or, the AD carry is waiting on Miramana. And if the AD carry is waiting 2 minutes until Miramana and you just completed your second core item and the dragon's coming up, well, you can't take the team fight if it's high variance, which means that your item wasn't important. And I think that these things aren't talked about enough. So when I look at a draft in LCK or LEC or LCS, when I'm doing, all the stuff, I try to size up how practical is it that these situations will unfold in the game. From laning phase to jungle paths to recall timers. What are the first recalls like? What does that do for certain champions? For instance, cheater recalls is something that I came up with the term with, because I wasn't seeing anyone do them. Sometimes they would do them unintentionally, but there's a difference between doing it intentionally versus randomly doing it. Doing it without intent, because when you do it intentionally, it means that you're aware of why you're doing it, you're manipulating it, and you can utilize it to great effect, and then you can apply it to other aspects of the game, because it's a concept, it's not like a thing. So for instance, like Aphelios, Ashe versus Aphelios. Ashe has better recalls on 900 and 1100 gold, which means that somewhere between waves 5 through 9 or 5 through 8, 5 through 9, whatever, Ashe can intentionally take aggressive trades against Aphelios to induce a earlier recall. And if she does that, it's more beneficial for her because the gold is better for her. Cheater recalls early on, the concept about like getting the call, getting the potion for free, and coming back to an advantageous lane state. It lines up with feigning the jungler, and fading the jungler, and things like this. So all of these things I think have to go into the draft. What does one item mean? What does two item mean? Third dragon is the mini game for me. First two dragons don't necessarily matter. The team comps have to be viewed by third dragon because the Olaf mini game is that Olaf teams generally get first and second Drake, or they should generally get first and second Drake. But the scaling team, which scaling is a pretty misunderstood term, it just means relative to the opponent. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that you lose lane. Generally comes online by third Drake. And that's the minigame, because if the Olaf team loses the third Drake, the scaling team gets 5 more minutes. And 5 more minutes often means very close to third item and has like utility item at that point. Their base levels are coming online. They're getting very close to second skill max point. Things like that, things of that nature. Armor's going up, base HP because levels. That's very problematic for the sinful team. And so those 5 minutes are very big because of what it implies. Yeah, this was long-winded, but that's what's going into the draft.
I just kind of, to take away, to keep it simple, and once again, making this black and white so that people can easily understand it, and admittedly, potentially opening it up for more criticism as a result. So first off, individual lane matchups, how they factor in, and then team synergy viewed through the lens of, in this case, more often than not, specifically itemization. Are you strong at the same time? Do your strengths interlock well, let's say? Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and the third thing you talked about was the third dragon.
Are there goals in mind?
Okay.
So, like, if you have Ezreal... Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go. Go. Sorry, there's like a slight delay. You just go.
No, yeah, okay. Sorry. Latency for you. Okay, so if you have Jarvan and you have Aatrox and you have a mid laner like... I don't know, a Kali, right? And then you have an AD carry like Ezreal. And the enemy team just has all protect. They just have, mid-range, they have like Orianna, or anything that just protects their AD carry, and they have a hyper.
Yep.
Like Aphelios.
Aphelios plus a bunch of shit to protect. So you have
3, like...
Got the Karma, the Orianna,
lots of stuff to protect Aphelios. Right. So even though Aatrox and Akali and Jarvan are in synergy with one another, relative to the Aphelios, they're doomed. They're set up for failure because the margin of error, the forgiveness that those champions have against Aphelios is not there. So Aphelios is over there and he is so excited, his eyes light up when he sees these champions, and he's like, "Yes, please try to come into me." And so this is one of the big problems about Aphelios, why I've been very outspoken about. He's not imbalanced. He doesn't need to get nerfed and all these other things. And I referenced the Dynamics game versus T1 yesterday was very good. So those champions are fine, and then it's what is Ezreal doing? He's picking off the Stranglers. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Or you'll have games where you have an Ezreal with a LeBlanc in mid lane, and then you have an Ornn in top lane, and Ornn's asking himself, why do I have a LeBlanc on my team? And then Ornn's asking, why do I have an Olaf that is building Cinderhulk and doesn't get Obsidian Cleaver or something? And it's just so many things are off. And the champions in a vacuum can be strong, but they hate each other. And not only do they hate each other, they might not line up against the enemy team comp. That makes sense.
Yeah. I don't
a lot.
I don't disagree with any of this. I guess when watching games, because the thing is I agree with everything that you're saying, but when watching games, I often feel that the flaw has very little to do, depending on what region I'm watching, has very little to do with if Ornn can itemize for his Olaf or not, versus individual players making poor choices and then making poor choices together. So it's hard for me because as my approach when I come into casting a game or even trying to break down a game, I'm trying to think about what the players are seeing and what they're, not necessarily what the perfect game is, but kind of what they want to do or where they might be individually making the choices that they're making. And I'm just the conversation is important, but I also feel it almost has nothing to do with so many losses because so much of the game isn't played anywhere near to the level that it needs to for those things to matter. So what do you say to that?
I think, so I would agree with you, Ornn's not going to lose the game because he can't itemize for Olaf, but I think the intention of pairing them together suggests a bigger problem. And I think that intent is where a lot of problems can lie inside of the draft phase, where they think that they're trying to do something and it might not stack up against the opposing team comp.
So it's like the
very
symptom.
well.
The Ornn Olaf is the symptom
right.
of the disease, and the disease is still the brain problem of thinking they work together.
Yes. Right. And so one of the things that I'll say is like, teams are bleeding out and they don't have the medication or something to coagulate the blood. And so rather than, just waiting and hoping, they need to just like tie it off to stop the bleeding. And they often can't. And so a lot of drafts and team comps, I agree with you. There's a lot of instances where the draft ends up not mattering between two teams. But I think we're at a point in time where draft is super important because of what is practical in terms of what we can assume to happen as League keeps evolving, like at certain game stages and breakpoints. And I say that over the scope of like, if these two teams played these two comps over, dozens and dozens of games, how likely would these events unfold? And I know that's like sort of an extreme example, but for instance, I guess an easier one that I would like to use to attack, which is probably very popular right now, is B1 Aphelios. I think B1 Aphelios sets you up for failure if you have two high-level teams playing against one another and they both know how to draft. So, because you open Aphelios B1, opponent responds R1, R2, Karma, Ezreal. Well, now Aphelios is already under pressure because Karma can go 3 lanes, she can go top, she can go mid, she can go support. Sometimes she can even go AD carry, but Ezreal's present. So now Aphelios has to respond to Ezreal Karma, but Ezreal Karma make up the exact identity and theme that Aphelios hates. So now Aphelios is like, okay, I need some help. So he brings in some help to go against Ezreal and Karma. So he brings in whatever on B2, B3. But oftentimes teams already aren't thinking like this. They're not thinking Ezreal Karma makes Aphelios' life hell. They're not thinking that red team already has 2 champions that hurt my conditional hypercarry, and they can still keep picking in response to what I'm going to pick to try to answer what they're doing. And what ends up happening is Aphelios gets neutered. Yes, they just go with a strong blind pick. So maybe they try to get something to help Aphelios. Maybe they pick Ornn, right? They pick Ornn, and then they pick something
Azir.
like Olaf or Azir. Okay, so they pick Ornn and Azir. So now Azir doesn't want to be forced to go in, but Ornn's now saying that he has to go in too, sort of, because otherwise what is Aphelios doing? He's just sort of like dead weight. Why do you have a random conditional hypercarry sitting back if you're going to play through the lens of Azir summoning Sand Soldiers and trying to poke? But Ezreal's outranging Azir. So there's still a fundamental problem there. But now you've shifted the team composition to where Azir is forced into one mode, Ornn is forced into one mode, and it's all Aphelios' fault. And so now the red team, when it's handed back over the draft to them on R3, they know, okay, team comp has to come into us. They're short range. Aphelios is making Azir and Ornn very sad pandas. And it doesn't matter that they're scaling. We can scale better relative to them by attacking the areas that they're weak and where they're compromised because of Aphelios. And then they could just slam like R3 Corki, and now they have like the concave, they have they have even longer range. And Aphelios is like, man, I really hate my life right now. Like, how do I play this game? How do I deal damage? And then R4 Kindred, and it's like, well, Ornn just wants to quit the game. And so things are constantly happening, and then Aphelios now has to blind his support. And Karma can still just go top lane. And it gets very awkward. So then Aphelios' support has to respect it. They have to pick a jungler, and they can try to get edges, but inevitably that endgame will approach where Aphelios is not doing what he wants to do because he just simply can't. Because the opponents are too long range, they have too much mobility, etc. And then Azir and Ornn are looking at him, and it's like, it's all your fault. Like, they're forced in. Like,
Dad shows up. Azir's like, I had so many expectations for you, son. Everyone talks about this 200 memes bullshit. You can't even hit anyone.
You were supposed to be the chosen one. We picked
you can't
first.
Even get in range.
You were the firstborn son. You were supposed to everything. All the expectations were on your shoulder. So, LS, just kind of wrapping up here.
You're wrapping up? I was about to ask him about Fnatic.
Okay. Let's wrap up with Fnatic then.
Okay, that's the perfect wrap up.
LS, we got to know, have you secretly been puppet mastering all of Fnatic?
So, obviously,
This is a much longer answer than no.
Yes. So, No, well, I want to address this because it bothers me when I get toxic people coming into my chat and like toxic people on Twitter that actually think that like I ruined Fnatic. If you watch Fnatic's games and you compare their gameplay and their draft approaches to the philosophy that I just go on tirades about on Twitter and on my streams, it is the absence of me. So there is no chance in hell that I have had any like things going on there. But also, from when scrims resumed for LEC at the very end of May until basically the end of June, I didn't talk to any of the Fnatic players. This was very public. I mean, Nemesis even commented on it on stream. I was very active talking to them in the offseason and stuff. But again, look at their drafts. Look at their gameplay. It's birthed in hell. I mean, it's definitely
The
it's
child
something.
comes in from school, opens up like their paint of butterfly and holds it to Ellis. He's like, "Look what I made for you, Dad." He's like, "This is not my child. What would you think?"
A book on Renaissance art and good paint strokes and these oil paints. You come back with this finger paint bullshit. I don't want to see it.
Takes the finger paint and
It's
throws it.
Morello.
I mean, that's
Oh man.
First pick Graves again.
So the insane thing is Fnatic has all insane players. They're really, really good. But when you watch their play, and when I talk about Fnatic, because I was privy to so much, I kind of view it like I'm under an NDA. But you can watch their play and tell they all have different ideas of what's going on. They are not in harmony. They are not a team. They are 5 very high-level players in a game together. That's what's happening. That's just how it is. And you can tell that players are they're viewing times in the game extremely differently than one another, and then others are getting dragged along and they're almost looking uncharacteristic with like their decision making sometimes. And it's just a very sad thing. And I guess I can't say much.
No,
more,
that's
but
fine. Well, I don't want you to. Yeah,
it's sad.
It's true. I appreciate that you're so diligent because obviously, yeah, one of the nice things about being a figure in esport is that pro players and pro teams will give you a lot of privileged information, and obviously the other side of that sword is that you
They
have to
trust
be.
you.
Is that they trust you. So yeah,
Yep.
I agree, and it has look. I think Frost, we talked about this earlier actually about how Fnatic look a little bit disjointed.
A little bit disjointed.
A little bit, but we'll leave it at that. Ellis, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to talk to us today about draft. This was super, super interesting. Maybe we have you back at the end of the season or before Worlds, or we come on Pog State if such a thing is possible. We can trade back and forth here.
Oh wait, Ellis, this is now your chance to plug everything, and I know you have a lot to plug. So please do it right now.
You've earned it. Please give us a 1 minute sellout speech,
right,
whatever you want.
Yeah, so 20 or which one? I co-stream LCK, LCS. I live view LEC every week. I cast Wednesday through Friday LCK, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday I'm doing the co-streaming and stuff. So you guys can watch me there. I also do content with like pro players sometimes on stream. And for 3,100 gold, you can buy Leandre's and. Yeah, Twitch Prime.
Tired of having casters lie
Is it
to you?
twitch.tv/LS? What is it?
It's I'm LS.
I'm LS. There you go.
Yeah, twitch.tv/IMLS. They won't give me LS.
That's
Very sad.
Twitch. We'll bring that up.
Very sad.
I actually have no power to say that. I don't know why I'm saying like I have any influence over Twitch. Twitch, give him LS. He's earned it. He's working 7 days a week. The man's unstoppable. Crown Shot's been on your stream. Nemesis has been on your stream. We'll see who else joins in the future. Super good stuff. But yeah, thanks again, LS, for joining us. Thank you for the conversation, and good luck with your very hectic schedule.
Thanks.
So love talking to LS. I feel like there's so much information there, and so much, but it's also, I think, so hard to have those conversations if you don't know a lot already about League of Legends still. And I think I like really appreciate you breaking some of this stuff down. I think a lot of things were broken down, and I really hope people could follow along. But also like there's so much going on there. If you're like a newcomer to esports, if you're really passionate about esports, but not necessarily about like the analysis portion of the game, there's a lot there. But super, super interesting.
Yeah, when he was talking about the trade patterns and the buy patterns of I think he used Aphelios versus Ashe, and you were like, I'm quickly doing the math. I'm like, okay, yeah, because his back's going to be a BF sword, her back can be his. She can go for a Cole
or IE or whatever,
or not a Cole, the Bork or
long
the
swords.
Essence Reaver, depending on how she wants to itemize. And like, I'm very quickly having to do all of that to like catch up, and I'm like, frankly, I don't necessarily really know where the vocabulary is for our audience yet. If they can just as quickly follow that to make all of those, or if they're able to, that's the real question for me. I do feel very strongly that we're going through like a transitionary period where our audience has reached a certain level now, and now it's our responsibility to kind of turn the next page and start bringing up these conversations. But then, as LS was also talking about, it's really hard to have those conversations live on air sometimes because you have to be so much faster. You can't take the time to be like, because of this and this and this and this. And I think that's kind of, at least for me, the next frontier is like finding the language there to shorthand everything so that you can have those really needed conversations, but in a very digestible way on the fly.
Yeah, and maybe just let us know in feedback, like what really clicked for you, what maybe didn't make as much sense to you, and we can adjust in the future. Because these are really things that I think are super fascinating, that I get really fired up about talking about, but I'm always nervous as to like, how deep do we go? Because terminology is always dangerous because you don't know who's there. And regardless, it
also
was super fascinating.
The different level of game. Like I remember last split when we sat down with Reckless, I think it was the week that Machine was there, and it was the G2 versus Fnatic game. And Reckless said something to the extent of like, we played a wave wrong, or we played 2 waves wrong, and that was basically the game. And at that level, having that detailed conversation probably is really important because it does mean a lot to like when the teams are playing that well or that in form. But again, I kind of go back to my other comments where a lot of teams are really playing very well right now. And sometimes those conversations, while very interesting and still important, aren't necessarily the most important conversations to be having on that broadcast because them misplaying that back timer isn't capitalized on by either
when
team.
your player's down 40 CS in any matchup, you have bigger problems than picking them the right matchup, right? And I think that's really fair. I think the thing that I like about that, and I think that I hope that people took away, is that like there's a lot of information in League of Legends that is free, that you don't have to contest for. That's pick bans. That's how a lane matchup should play out. And of course, there's always going to be new picks in draft that throw a spanner in the works. There's going to be new ways to play a champion that people will not be prepared for. But for the most part, there's a ton of information that's available. Of course, in the game, there's Fog of War. It's much more complicated. It's much more poker-esque as opposed to, all the face-up cards, right? To a certain degree. But I think that the hope is that in the future, as we get more advanced, as coaching staffs get better, that people take more advantage of the information that is freely available in any pick ban, in any game, in any matchup, all the stuff, and recognize it and respect it and act on it rather than, I guess, ignore it.
And I think the one last thing that I really want to put on that I see a lot of people kind of leverage at LS, and it was almost a throwaway comment from him, but just to like really underline it, is just because you're a scaling composition, because again, we have so many different definitions of certain words that people hear scaling, and some of our audience do only think that scaling means late game, that you don't have any sort of lane dominance, and that's not true. Azir as a champion exists. He has amazing scaling, and he's super powerful in lane. It's just kind of like an easy throwaway to that answer. And I think that's what's also really important, that it's about finding the balance, that there's enough champions right now that are in a powerful state where they have really strong lanes or they can have winning lane matchups, and they also scale into late game. So just because someone talks about building a composition that has scaling options doesn't mean that you completely sack your early game. Because I always see this like black and white of, if you give away the early game, then X team does, this, that, and that, and then you can't come back. And it's like, well, no, just because you have a scaling comp doesn't mean you don't have any way to fight into the early game. Doesn't mean that there's no way that you can find trades. If it doesn't have to be team fights, it can be trading for lane pressure or trading for gold on the towers, in the lanes, in the jungle, all of these things.
I think the lesson for the day is that context is supremely important, and that it is not black and white, that there is a ton of gray area, but that for the sake of 280 characters, for the sake of simple concepts and teaching people, often it's easier to make it black and white. So don't be afraid to look deeper. If you're at home, ask questions. Is he scaling? Maybe you wouldn't consider it normally, but if the enemy champion's only playing Lee Sin, well, by comparison, he scales pretty well. And these are the kind of questions maybe you can ask yourself when you're doing analysis or you're watching games, or you're trying to appreciate what's going on in very high-level League of Legends. Regardless, that's going to do it for us here. The LEC is going to be returning for the second half of the split, kicking off at 5:30 CEST, I believe, with Ready Check. SK versus Schalke starting at 6. So that one is going to be wild. Will Schalke find their second win? Is it an upward trajectory for SK? Ooh, find out on the next episode of LEC.